And thanks everybody for being here today for our talk with Dr. Palmer, Business Ethics and Sustainability. So again, just some housekeeping items. We will be recording this lecture and I will share the link after the event. If you're a Western student and you're coming in for signature credit, stay tuned. I'll be putting a link in the chat for you to record your attendance. And I'll also be putting resources in the chat about the Ethics Center. Before introducing our speaker, I'd also like to thank our co-sponsor, the Hayworth College of Business's Center for Sustainable Business Practices, which our speaker directs. And now I'd like to tell you more about our speaker, Dr. Timothy Palmer. Dr. Palmer is a professor of management at Western's Hayworth College of Business. His integration of service learning in the capstone strategic management class led to a Michigan Campus Compact Faculty and Staff Community Service Learning Award in 2009. Dr. Palmer received the 2014 Distinguished Professor of the Year Award from the President's Council, State Universities of Michigan, and Western's 2014 nomination for the Carnegie Foundation Professor of the Year Award. Dr. Palmer's research on student learning, organizational reputation, sustainability, and strategic decision-making has appeared in numerous publications, including Organization Science and the Journal of Management. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Palmer.
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And my students that are in here are probably thinking, I didn't know he did those things. I'm surprised to hear this. So I'm really glad to be here because I'm talking about a subject that I am clearly very passionate about, the concept of ethics and sustainability in particular. And my background is a little bit varied. I wasn't a traditional academic route. I started with an undergraduate degree in forestry. And so my early interests were all environmentally focused. And I kind of found myself in sustainability later in life and in academics. So I'm thrilled to be here. So my agenda today, my intent is to talk about really business education and how it's been evolving over the years and aligned with sustainability, and why is that? Why does that happen? And then in particular, to use the Hayworth College of Business as an example of the sorts of things that you would be seeing in business schools around the country. And so with that, I want to share my screen. I closed out, and you see now Sandy and I were talking beforehand how things kind of happen that you don't anticipate when you're doing technology, like closing out all your screens. And so let me lead into this. Hopefully you can all see that now. So ethics and sustainability and the concept of business education. And in particular, what I'd like to address is why business education must change, what's really driving that need for change, how are we changing, and then talk about the Hayworth College of Business in particular. And that my aim, my goal is to close the gap between perceptions that people have about business education and the reality of what business education is really about. Because I think sometimes some folks think this is what we teach in the College of Business, when in fact that may not completely be the case. And so I hope to close that gap. And so this is a common screen a slide I share with my class, that if you were a business student in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the ethos of business school at the time was the business of business is business. And that really was originated by Milton Friedman, who was a Nobel Prize winning economist from the University of Chicago. And his whole perspective about what role do companies play in society, making communities, society stronger, should they do that? And he said, no, they don't, because essentially everything that you do beyond what the law says you have to do, you're spending somebody else's money, right? And that's not a good use of resources. And really the business of business is business. And that mantra that came from it is this: maximize shareholder wealth, maximize owner wealth. And at some level that might make sense. The problem with it is that I don't think they really listened to everything that he said. And when you think about maximizing owner wealth and equity and so on, you're really talking about a long period of time. But the messaging that many executives and others got was really maximizing short-term success, which can oftentimes hinder long-term success. And so that was a real problem. And indeed, you can see examples of that from an ethics perspective. And Volkswagen is a prime example. In their race to be the global market share leader in the automotive sector, really wanted to dethrone General Motors. And so they were really touting themselves as, not only an economical, in some cases, vehicle, but eco-friendly vehicle. And in fact, there was a big hoax with regard to their emissions and the emissions scandal, right? And what was driving that drive to be the market share leader, right? And so clearly an ethics issue. Or more currently, Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, and that ethos that exists in the Silicon Valley startup community of fake it until you make it. So you may not really have the product that's ready to go. In this case, a blood testing simple, test that Walgreens could deliver that would identify a number of different potential, illnesses. That ethics concerns, well, as long as we get ourselves to the next stage, that's all that really matters. And so there's these ethical concerns, and then certainly if you think about looming global concerns, right, and the population exploding, and that if you think about by the year 2040, of projecting 9 billion people, of them 3 billion will be new middle class consumers, and we talk about this in my ethics sustainability class quite a bit. Is how is that going to happen? And how do you have billions of new middle class consumers wanting automobiles and electronics and so on? Where are the resources going to come from to meet those needs? A 50 to 100% increased need for food, water, and energy. How in the world are we ever going to get to that space? And so if you think about where we are now at 7.9 billion, we've got just a little ways to go, right? Or climate change, so development issues and climate change. The fact that this is the crisis of for the foreseeable future. What are we going to do about this? When the UN says it's indisputable that human activities and companies are a major part of this, are causing climate change, right? What are we possibly going to do? How do we change? And so there's these development issues going on. There's sustainability issues going on. So I think there's these two pressures, at least in the business world, about why do business schools need to change? You see these pressures in the business world, and some of these issues with ethics and this lack of trust with not just business, with all institutions, whether you're talking about media and government, but business just as well. And that's a challenge. That doesn't help the corporate sector. And then you have overdevelopment. How are we going to get millions of billions of people into the middle class? Where are the resources going to come from when we have a planet that essentially has finite resources? How is that going to happen? And so I like to say from a kind of a global or from a macro perspective, business is evolving towards sustainability and toward a sustainability lens. And so I think that the business education community has to do the same thing, or we're not going to be relevant. Right? And I'm often asked, what does sustainability mean? And I'm sure that my students who might be in the audience could tell you this. There are so many definitions of sustainability, and many of them are nuanced, but they tend to be similar or draw from the United Nations Brundtland Commission definition of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And even in my own research, looking at companies and their sustainability goals and how they think about sustainability, they may not use all of those words, but they're clearly embodying the concept of meeting needs without jeopardizing, inhibiting, compromising the ability of future generations to have their needs be met. And what that means then is when we talk about meeting needs, there's kind of that big question mark around, well, whose needs are you talking about? Right? We're talking about customers' needs. Historically, business met customers' needs with products and services that were in demand, right? But we've also talked about maximizing shareholder wealth. We have investors, we have owners who have needs, we have employees who have needs, we have the community that has needs, we have suppliers that have needs. So thinking about this broad set of stakeholders, right, and that's changing the way business thinks about, why does it exist, right, and how does it ultimately evolve, and who does it serve? And I think most currently, even though we've been talking about this whole stakeholder approach for quite a while in business schools, you're finally seeing the business community say, okay, enough of this maximizing shareholder wealth mantra, because that really doesn't define what we as business leaders think is the role of business. And the Business Roundtable, which is a group of sort of what's the word I want to use? Executives of leading companies in any event, have come together and they talk regularly. And in 2019, they kind of finally put the stake in the ground and said, that it's really not just about shareholder value, that we really need to take this much more of the stakeholder approach and think about, the impact that we have on our customers, but also on our employees and also on society as a whole. And so having this much more eclectic view about what is our purpose. And you certainly can see companies that not only follow that perspective, but perhaps maybe drove that perspective. Right? And a common example I like to use in my class is Unilever, because they're perhaps one of the most sustainable companies that exist, and every single one of their brands is connected somehow to some purpose. And so thinking about planet and society, we're a company of brands and people with a big purpose to make sustainable living commonplace. So you're seeing big companies moving in that direction. That's pushing this need for change in business education, because companies are changing. Even small companies, I like to think just down the road, just down Howard Street, when you're on West Main, there's this long set of picket fences as you're heading to the west, is Calsec. And Calsec is a spice company, and they make historically mint spices, now other types of spices for the food industry. Just recently became a certified B Corporation. And so again, putting that stake in the ground that says that we're not just about maximizing value for our owners and investors, right, that we're setting very specific strategic, sustainable, environmental and social goals as well. And so that B certifications is a kind of a telltale sign of a company that's developing this or embracing this perspective. Why should business students learn about ethics and sustainability? Well, I think so there's these macro changes taking place, but we are preparing the next generation of, as we like to say in the business school, the next generation of responsible business leaders. And so from a purpose-driven perspective or a deontological perspective, it's just the right thing to do, right? If we're going to prepare the next generation of business leaders, responsible business leaders, it's the right thing to do. But at the same time, I think in business school preparation, we're mindful of who are our stakeholders, and recruiters are some of our important stakeholders. Those companies like Unilever, like Calsec, they embrace sustainability. And so our graduating students have to understand how what they do, even if they're in a very specific functional role, how their job and their duties interacts with the company's broader strategic and sustainability goals. And if they're not doing that, if they're not getting that fit, then they're going to be out of alignment with the organization's strategies. And so, we're thinking a lot about preparing students, because companies want students, who understand these concepts, and we're interested in placement. And so from a utilitarian perspective, an outcome-based perspective, I think it's in our best interest. It's the right thing to do, maybe, but it's also the thing to do because it can help with our placement. And in particular, our stakeholders tell us that ethics and sustainability matter. Right? And these stakeholders include our students tell us this, our accrediting body, the AACSB, tells us this, our recruiters tell us this. So let me give you some examples of why it's an exciting time actually to be a business professor teaching sustainability. And I want to take zero credit for what this group is doing, but Delta Sigma Pi is our professional business fraternity in the College of Business, and made up of students in all of our academic majors. And I asked the president the other day, what are some of the things that DSP is doing with regard to the community? And just in academic year 2021-22, they were involved with Loaves and Fishes, with Habitat for Humanity, My Dear Friend, Family and Christian Services, Fleece and Thank You, Ronald McDonald House. This wasn't coming from an academic advisor saying you need to be doing these things. Right? This is coming because it's a part of the culture of what they do. And I'm just really proud of the fact that our business RSOs are thinking about how they interact with the community, and not just about getting a job, right? But how do they use organizations like DSP to have an impact, to do something positive in the community. And again, it wasn't coming from a faculty advisor saying, you should be doing this, right? They did it on their own volition. They did it because they thought it was the right thing to do, or that's my perspective. Students care. It's really clear to me that students are evolving. Right? And my generation back when we thought about jobs and we thought about careers around dollars and cents, and where you might be living. Our students now think about values, they think about purpose, they think about principle, they think about meaning, and how they can identify a career that's in alignment with their values. And so for all the bashing that can go on among different generations, this generation of students are so purpose driven from my perspective. And so our students are evolving. Every semester I ask my students at the beginning of the term, what are some of the issues, environmental issues, social issues, that are most concerning to you? Right? And it's pretty broad based, from environmental issues, water issues, emissions, biodiversity, waste, social issues, healthcare, human and civil rights, pandemics, poverty, and so on. And I don't think they just are aware of these things. They think about it. I had a student the other day walked out of class, and we were talking about some significant environmental challenges, and you can tell they dwell on some of these issues. They're concerned about these issues more than previous generations might have been. And so does our accrediting body, and that's an important issue. And the AACSB is aware of this as well. And I'll come back to that in just a second. Some data I'd like to share. The United Nations estimates that $5 trillion to $7 trillion per year between 2015 and 2030 is needed to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals globally. 5 trillion to 7 trillion every year to reach net zero carbon by 2050. $9.2 trillion a year between now and 2050. It's a lot of money. Where is that money going to come from? And I'm still kind of back to students here, although it may not seem like it at this moment. Where's that money going to come from? It's not going to come from government. Or maybe some of it might come from government. It's not going to come from the nonprofit sector. And some of it will come from there, but it's going to come from the corporate sector. Right? And so, kind of back to students, we talk about jobs and careers, and the ways that students can kind of infuse that search for principle and purpose, through pretty stoic, staid companies like Morgan Stanley. You think of these, very traditional Wall Street bankers that now have an Institute for Sustainable Investing, that are thinking about the corporate sector and how do we help companies raise money through green bonds or through blue bonds for water. Right? What an exciting space if you're a finance student. And so it's a way to kind of blend those things, and our students are excited about those kinds of jobs. Right? Or how do we think about the business opportunities that exist with regard to single-use plastic? The opportunity that exists there is tremendous if we can put entrepreneurial skills and mindsets toward that. And so students are excited about that. And so again, where is this demand coming from? Part of it's coming from students. Right? Are we talking in class about venture capital? And you might think about venture capital funds and so on, but there's a lot of really interesting companies like Patagonia that has a venture capital fund that it rewards or awards money to startup social or more typically environmental enterprises that are solving really difficult environmental types of challenges. And a student came out to me after class and she said, I didn't even know these kinds of jobs existed, that you could actually work for Patagonia in their venture capital wing, right? Providing access to capital to startup for early stage companies that are in this environmental space. What a really cool place to start a career. Right? Or just the other day in class, we were talking about why analytics. How do you measure impact? If you're a social enterprise, or if you're, Tin Shed Ventures and you're trying to evaluate the impact of some of these startup companies you're thinking about investing in, how do you get at that? Well, what a great time to be somebody interested in data analytics, right? That's more than just measuring, looking at numbers, but thinking about connecting a purpose to it. Right? And my students know I get all excited about some of this stuff because I think there's just so many really interesting opportunities that didn't exist before in the business school. And clearly it's an exciting time to be a business student. Business education is evolving, and as I mentioned a second ago, so does our accrediting body is evolving as well. And we cannot afford, the Haworth College of Business cannot afford to lose our accreditation with the AACSB, which is the most stringent accrediting body for business schools globally. And in 2020, new standards came out, and one of the standards is societal impact. Societal impact as an expectation of all accredited schools reflects AACSB's vision that business education is a force for good in society and makes a positive contribution to society. And so we'll be accredited by, in part by data that we can show associated with how are we having an impact? And it goes beyond graduating students, right? And it has to do with how are our students, how are our programs having an impact in society. It's a tall order, but it's an expectation. And so our education has to change. Our delivery of education in the Hayward College business has to change. Students expect us to do that. Our accreditors expect us to do it. And our employers do as well. I sat in on a session through the AACSB just the other day on how do you get at societal impact? And we're talking about the challenge for business schools. And one of the conversations that, among the panelists was, what is it that employers are looking for right now? And, historically you would have said, well, we need HR students, we need, we need strategy people, we need finance students, accounting, and so on. But those weren't the kinds of things that the panelists was saying. They were saying we need students who are resilient, that understand resilience, who failed and understand how you bounce back from failure, or empathy, or compassion, authenticity, collaboration, right? And these are different skills, that we're not accustomed to delivering and infusing. Right? We have to change. If our employers expect that, we have to change. Or at a broader scale, if we talk about these wicked problems and grand challenges, things like climate change, ending extreme poverty everywhere, SDG #1. It's going to require public-private partnerships, which is all about collaboration. What are we doing to ensure that our students are good collaborators? I mean, how do we do that? And so, kind of to summarize, where's this need coming from, and so on. I think to be remaining relevant, we have to change. Business school has to change, right? And so relevance requires us to change. And I also happen to think that we have a tremendous opportunity through business to create good. And so I think that it's simply the right thing to do. And it does require some new thinking among faculty about how we think about, what does it mean to be a successful company and performance? And for a while, we've been, teaching about, talking about, maybe performance as a unidimensional construct like, earnings per share or net income or so on. But increasingly, you see companies starting to talk about, what are the other dimensions that are important, whether you're in a triple bottom line perspective in terms of society, what are the social goals that we're setting and how do we measure that and quantify it and then report out on it, or our environmental issues, what are our goals, what are our metrics in addition to profit. But that in itself is somewhat historical. And as I try to get our students to think differently about company success, and I love my collaborations I've had with WMU's Office for Sustainability and Jeff Spolstra and Harold Glasser before him, to get me to think differently about what does success really mean, right? And that you can't just think about triple bottom line because that somehow signifies these three independent constructs that aren't related, and they're very related. And so if you think about in the middle, you have, economic success, whether that's a community's economy or a company's economy. You can't be successful in a society that's not healthy, and you can't have a society that's healthy in a planet that's unhealthy, right? And so that's driving everything, right? And it's forcing us to think differently. And I'm not mean to say that everybody's there yet, but to think differently about what does success look like, right? What does a regenerative business look like? So kind of like get the focus off of short-termism and think about long-term, companies able to regenerate themselves over time. What does that look like? How do we redefine success away from profitability to prosperity? Right? What does that mean? Right? It's much bigger than a dollar sign at the bottom of a net income statement. It's much more than that. And then again, you can't have profits without a healthy society. You can't have a healthy society without a healthy planet. So that all goes hand in hand. And all of that thinking, that movement towards sustainability requires lots of new skills. And I mentioned some of the ones, in terms of, personal skills of cooperation and empathy and so on. But you look at companies now and the kinds of reporting that they're doing. Right? And this is just one example from one company reporting data out to SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or their sustainability reporting initiatives through the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, right, or through the Sustainable Development Goals, and linking their strategies to one of the 17 goals or many of those goals, or the Carbon Disclosure Project. I think that tells me that students need new skills or need to reinforce existing skills in new ways that are aligned with sustainability. Right? And again, I mentioned Unilever before, not just about the company and sustainability, but throughout their supply chain. How do you infuse sustainability and an ethics around sustainability throughout the supply chain, or Target, so a retailer that now has climate policies and goals. Right? Ultimately, that's my punchline here, is that our students, they have to understand these issues. And so when we're talking about climate change and the science of climate change, I think you could have students who might think, why do we talk about this? And it's because your companies are going to be talking about this. They're going to be setting goals around this. Right? And if you don't understand the language and the concept, how in the world are you ever going to fit your job into what your company is doing? And so, as I mentioned before, we have to help our students see how their ultimate careers, right, intersect with the company and its strategies. So that being said, there are challenges. There's no doubt about the fact that there's challenges, that curricula are very slow to change. Right? And you think about WMU and how long does it take to get new programs through? Right? It can take over a year. And viewpoints vary considerably. Not everybody might be on board with some of these changes. And that's just within our own institution. And then you think about higher education, and we're not exactly known for being agile, right, and fast or very flexible. And so you have that barrier. And then, I've heard this said too, even in my own PhD training, I wasn't really trained to teach in this kind of an environment. There was the day when the professor professed, and stood up there and just sort of gave information. Well, information is easy to get, from lots of different sources. And so how do we think differently? Because when we weren't trained to teach differently, right? How do you teach compassion? I mean, how do you begin to do that? I mean, these are challenges, and I don't deny that these are challenges. All right, so let me pivot now to business education in particular and how it is changing. So I tried to talk about why it needs to change, and it's primarily coming from a stakeholder perspective. It needs to change. How is it changing, right? And what are some things that business schools are doing? And I want to use Hayworth as one example because it's the one that I know best, clearly, and that there are the kinds of things I'll talk about, I suspect, are happening in lots of places. It's just the one that I happen to know best. You think about the College of Business, about every classroom you go into are our learning goals. And one of our learning goals is students will understand ethical business practices. Right? And so the business school started to change over a decade ago when it recognized the need for ethics. And the ethics really was broader than just ethics, which is big enough in itself. It also included sustainability. And so I'd say it's been about 10 years since we started moving in this direction, right, to ensure that our students understood, A, what is sustainability. I'm positive our students get that, but they can apply sustainability issues to their own academic majors and then also to their own personal lives. So it's a part of our learning goals and objectives that we routinely measure, collect data on, and so on. And so it's part of our learning goals, but it's also now embedded in our coursework. And we're the only college in the university that has an expectation that every single one of our BBA students will have a class in sustainability. And so one of the classes Norm Hawker teaches, that I teach, others teach it as well, in business ethics and sustainability. And then likewise, we have a similar class at the MBA level in sustainable business strategy. And that class especially is all focused on the United Nations SDGs. The whole course, the template, is all focused on business and the SDGs. So our classes are changing in terms of our business school curricula at the undergraduate level and the graduate level. The other way that we're changing, and this is, I think, very consistent with WMU's strategy as a whole, is this movement toward active learning and service learning. And again, I always want to give a shout out to people that I need to recognize. And Sean Tenney at the Office of Service Learning has been such an incredible partner for me, helping to deliver service learning. And from her words, not mine, she would know this better through her connection through Campus Compact and other organizations, that the class where I primarily teach is a large section auditorium class. I've got 240, almost 250 students in that class. That it's one of the only classes of that size in the country that's doing service learning at scale. that we figured out a process. I mean, it's not terribly difficult. It might be uncomfortable at first to do service learning in a class of 20 or 30, but when you're talking about 250 students, it's a pretty remarkable thing. And so we've embedded service learning into our curriculum. Uh, and I gave a statistic pre-pandemic where all business students were doing this every semester, about 4,000 hours of service learning each semester. Now it's an option because of the pandemic, but these are examples of where my students this semester are serving. Read and Write Kalamazoo, Literacy, Senior Services of Southwest Michigan, Meals on Wheels. You know, Youth Advancement Academy is helping kids who dropped out complete and not just get a GED, but get their degree, their high school degree, diploma. Loaves and Fishes, a food bank. You can see the list on there. I mean, I have students all across Kalamazoo and really the state engaged in active-based service learning. And I'm not going to belabor this rubric, but I only bring it up to mention that it's not just volunteerism, and I'm trying to be very careful with my students that it's about service learning. And it's how you learn through the act of doing service. And so they're thinking about, how does this relate to this experience tutoring a 13-year-old? How does this relate to my major, whether it's advertising or it's finance or leadership and business strategy or whatever the case might be. And so just one really quick example of what do I mean by this. So this is Victor Perez. Victor was actually a student on my study abroad and one of our Greenleaf Trust scholars. And when we were in India, we had a service learning project where we were cleaning up a city block. And one of the takeaways, which you wouldn't expect it on the front end of a project like this, I mean, it was really pretty trashed. But it was really difficult. Our host university, they were very hesitant, very skeptical. Oh, Dr. Palmer, we can't do this. This is going to put you in a dangerous community. We don't think you should do that. We don't have enough time in the schedule. They had a number of reasons of why we just couldn't do it. We work with another company, right, to work alongside their employees, and they had a host of issues. This isn't going to work. And then, we were paired up with a nonprofit organization who does this kind of work. They were incredibly facilitating until the police showed up. Right? And the police are like, where are your permits? You can't just be painting. Well, of course you can't just be painting. But the nonprofit, they supposedly had checked all this out. But one of the takeaways was that it's not just about doing good. There are barriers. There's always going to be roadblocks. And the question is, how do you confront those roadblocks? How do you rise to meet those challenges? I think that's just an example of the kinds of things students might think about, because certainly they're going to encounter these types of issues in their career. And my MBA students as well, actively involved in service learning. I taught an MBA class actually embedded within Parker Hannifin. We had a service project with a Section 7 housing complex, working with Open Doors, Vine Street neighborhood. Again, it's infused in really both our undergraduate and graduate programs. Right? In addition to service learning, I've got an honors college section, and again, to recognize people that are helping me do this. Dr. Neil Drobny is a fantastic colleague who just recently moved here from Ohio State. And he's helping me get active-based, project-based learning into my honors college section of our business ethics and sustainability class, working with companies on real sustainability types of issues. And so you can see the kinds of things our students are working on this semester or last at Whirlpool. We've done a couple of projects for them this year, coming up with a reporting system to track Scope 3 emissions from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. A couple of studies actually for WMU. One is a pricing strategy for EV charging stations. Lily pads, I mean, this is a really cool thing. I mean, an entrepreneur who's got a renewable energy type of boat, a solar powered, self-operating net zero carbon pontoon boat. What does that market look like for that? Hayworth, the company that we're named for, furniture company, did a project on sustainable packaging and work from home attitudes. Abercrombie and Fitch on sustainability partnerships, primarily within their supply chain. And now Owens Corning, again, a sustainable supply chain. Our students are getting a lot of exposure to sustainability issues through service learning and through active learning. And then the topic I love to talk about, right? And I'm going to pay attention to my watch because I could go on and on with this. is the sustainability study abroad. And again, I don't do this alone. This is done in conjunction with the Colleges of Health and Human Services and the College of Education and Human Development. And so we put together a sustainability study abroad in India that has been kind of hijacked because of COVID, but we're actively recruiting for December of this year of 2022. And that whole trip is associated with ethics, but primarily in sustainability. And just really briefly, what's motivating me to do this? A trip like this. And my PhD is in strategic management. And as I tell my students, for years I've taught you teach. There's always a chapter in strategy on international strategies. Why do companies think about international strategies? And always one of the motives, right, is access to cheap resources, right, inexpensive labor, energy, natural resources, and so on. And finally, I said it so many times, and I never really stopped to really think about what does that mean. I understand it's a way to cut your costs, which increases your net income, but what about the people that you're employing? What is your responsibility to them, right? Yes, you're providing a job, but and you're making their life better because of that. But are you taking advantage of a population that doesn't have a lot of alternatives? What does it look like from a company's perspective? What is your responsibility if you're going to be a company who's outsourcing or offshoring in India? What is your obligation? What is your responsibility? And I think that being on the ground and in the space, it can change my students' perspectives. And I know that it does. And so I'm always excited to take students to the developing world to go visit with companies. And we do that. And when time allows us, we see the Taj Mahal and we tour. But some of the components of that study abroad trip is that we meet with nonprofit organizations, and those could be organizations that are dealing with literacy issues, trafficking, human trafficking issues, really tough visits. Hearing about the depth of the challenges that exist in developing India. Right, we visit with companies and we hear about the kinds of sustainability strategies that they have in place. We learn a lot about culture. I mean, how do you go to India and not, pick up on culture, on food, on music, and history, and as well. And then the nice thing again is it's very interdisciplinary, and so that's intentional. Right? It's intentional so that when you have, let's say, a social work student who said, "Business, you should be doing more. Look at these problems. You make so much money, you should be doing more." And there's some truth to that. And then I get my business students who say, we understand that, we see that, right? But we're not government, right? We have an obligation. We have to be sustainable. And so how do we merge this idea of you have to do more with you also have to be profitable, right? And you get really rich conversations because of that intentional interdisciplinarity, as we say at WMU, by bringing those schools together. And engineering students come along on this trip as well. It's really, really neat. Right? And so we visit with companies like Infosys, a Fortune 500 company. We go to a school that's embedded in a slum community, providing 360-degree social services for kids, families, in addition to education through college for these children. Just an amazing opportunity and a lot of fun and a lot of passion as you're sitting in these classrooms with the kids playing soccer afterwards, doing whatever. And all the while thinking about models that make business and society stronger, because when you can do that, then it's sustainable. Similarly, when the pandemic hit, I had a virtual study abroad, and in that case, met with colleagues in India virtually, but then also paired up my students at WMU with students in an Indian university working on a project together associated with the Sustainable Development Goals. And that was a rich experience in itself. And then, lastly, so our curriculum is changing. We're becoming much more active-based, experience-based in our courses and what we're doing. We have a study abroad. And then the last, I should say, I need to be careful saying this, but we are a signatory to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education. And the last time I looked, this is what I have to be careful about, we were the only public business school in the state of Michigan to be a signatory. U of M is not a signatory, MSU is not a signatory, Central is not a signatory. Essentially what we've said is that we are going to embed sustainability in our curriculum, in our research, in our activities, and we are a signatory to Prime, and so I'm proud about that. And I spoke about some of the things that I'm most familiar with. That's not to say there are not a lot of other initiatives going on within the college. I know, for example, in CIS, students are working with data. They've often worked with emissions data, as a way of getting students to use data associated with sustainability. I have great colleagues in marketing strategy and marketing research that are focused on sustainability types of strategies. In our strategic management classes, there's typically a sustainability component. And then in our LBS major, leadership and business strategy, the whole Bronconist wine, a purpose-driven business, showing students how you can have a business that actually solves social, in some cases, environmental issues. So there's a lot of examples of that going around. All that being said, and I'm about to wind it up, is there still work to be done? And I understand that. And I'm not this, Pollyanna, everything is good, everything is great with the world and business community. It's not. And there's still work to be done. And to kind of go back to the Business Roundtable, they made this statement that we're not just about maximizing shareholder wealth, and we have to think about all of our stakeholders. And, they all agreed to this and they all signed off on it. And it was quite a publicity event as well. And I should be happy, right? But yet I'm torn. And, why am I torn? And during the pandemic, it was common for folks to come to me because I'm a sustainability person saying, what's happening? Our company's still focused on this issue, because you see headlines like this one: US companies cut thousands of workers while continuing to reward shareholders during the pandemic, laying people off while paying a dividend or increasing a dividend in some cases. Right. So how can you claim that, you're, about all your stakeholders, and it's going to take a while. And some of the fallout, unfortunately, has been on people that, oftentimes in, the least well off, that bear the brunt of some of the sacrifices. And so I don't mean to say that we're there yet, and I don't want to make it sound like we are there yet, but I think we're headed in a direction. And, as people have counseled me, and when I get discouraged, it takes time to turn around an aircraft carrier. You're talking about culture and history and the way we do business, and that's slowly, it's starting to change, although there's some really great examples of companies that are, embedding sustainability into everything that they do. And then lastly, my younger, folks in the audience here may not remember this, but General Motors for a while was running an advertisement that this is not your father's Oldsmobile, trying to, tell people that the cars have changed, they're not so dowdy, and so on. So I would argue too, this is not your father's business school. And when I'm across campus and I hear the misperception still that we're only focused on making money, I don't think there's no doubt that we have to focus on making money. But to say that that's all that we are focused on, that's your father's business school, right? Or it would have been my business school back in the day, but that's not what our students are learning now. And I'm proud of the fact that we've actually evolved quite a bit from that. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, because that's what I have, right? And welcome to entertain any thoughts or questions or whatever.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we do have a few questions for you to think about. This is from Jazz Krasinski. What are your favorite companies or organizations that have ethical and sustainable practices?
All right. So there's a number, and I could always go to Patagonia. They're so about the environment, and if they think about, for them to be successful in the future, they need people to be outdoors, and they need to be in a healthy outdoors. But so there's companies like that, and Unilever, but there's companies like Cascade Engineering, which people don't even know about, and it's in Grand Rapids. And it's a plastics injection molding company. They make dashboards for cars and other sorts of things. But they're so focused on social issues of sustainability. They've got a welfare to work program that's embedded within their organization. They've got an anti-racist statement within their organization. They intentionally go out to employ people who are difficult to employ, typically because they have incarceration records. There's just a lot of things, and many companies, they don't brag about it. Some do, but others don't. It's just kind of who they are. I mean, Gazelle Sports on the mall. I'm a runner. Chris Lampin Crowell, in starting that company, was all about how do we create a healthy Kalamazoo, bringing girls on the run to Kalamazoo. Yes, they sell running shoes and expensive running shoes, right? But it's also about health. And so it's nice that there's lots of examples. Tomorrow, I'm super excited. We've got a young man coming into class who started a company called Forever Great. And he's his 20s, but he's a hiker and he got tired of hiking to Lake Michigan and seeing all the crummy plastic bottles, lined up on the shore. So he's created a clothing company that uses recycled plastic bottles, right? Like little examples, startup companies, big companies. They're not all there yet, and I know it, but there's a lot of examples. And in class, we're constantly like, you've never heard of this company, BioLite, which is bringing healthy cook stoves to the developing world, or companies that are bringing solar technology to the developing world. There's lots of really cool business models.
So great examples. Thanks. So another question in the chat is a pretty big question.
Yeah.
It's from Nate Briner. What is your most concerning view of issues that our world faces today above everything else? You have to think
Above
about that
everything
for a
else.
minute.
Yeah, Nate, leave it to you to ask me a really, really good question. I think that the trouble, the problem, you can look at the science. So like, let's just talk about climate change, right? Climate change is clearly a problem that we all know about. But it's not just the science of climate change. The problem is where are we going to get the motivation and the collegiality to do something about it, right? And I think that's a bigger problem, because when you have some people who are perhaps dismissive still, like, well, this isn't real, this is just, whatever. But then you have other people who just can't comprehend it. What does it mean when you're talking about 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade, over pre-industrial times of temperature? I don't feel that, right? So, and when you're talking about 2050, 2070, I won't even be here then. Right. And so what is my motivation when I can't experience the problem directly? What do we do about it? Or, in class, we talk about the shifting baseline, idea that when you're so accustomed to the kind of downpours that we have in Kalamazoo on a regular day, we didn't always have downpours, right? That's kind of a new phenomenon. Or where you have 3 hurricanes lined up in the Atlantic Ocean barreling towards the southeast, we didn't have that. Or, I mentioned my background was in forestry. I started out as a forester fighting forest fires. I mean, I guess they could put me to work now, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of need for what I can do. Yet people don't really, the problems are big and they can't comprehend it. And so that's maybe not the answer that you expected. I think part of it's just us. And it's galvanizing the kind of support, across politicians and educators and people, right, to want to be motivated to do something about it.
So I was going to say to our attendees, again, I'd love for you to put some more questions in the chat, but if you would like to, for me to unmute you and you could ask Dr. Palmer a question directly, that's perfectly fine too. Just raise your hand. There's a raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. So I'm super interested in your study abroad in India, and I love the fact that your class is interdisciplinary. The Ethics Center is all about interdisciplinary.
Yeah,
I
right.
really believe in the benefits of having people see things differently, right? That's one of the things we do, I think, in college, right? We teach students to see the world from a distinct perspective. And the danger, of course, is that it becomes very siloed and narrow, right? But it can really be a rich resource when we uh, grab other people's hands, right, and look at a big, wicked problem together, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about the interdisciplinary nature
Yeah,
of what you do.
I'm so glad you asked me that question, because and I think this is a message to students as well, is that you don't really know when things are going to come along the way they come along. You might have these ideas and you set a goal and a strategy to make something happen. And sometimes you're in the right place at the right time, and you have a choice at that moment to do something about it or not. And the College of Business was interested in a sustainability, a study abroad in general to India, and with this partner at Christ University in Bangalore. And so I met with their international relations person from Christ University, with our dean, and my Indian colleague said to me, Tim, you just don't bring students to India. You need to come here first, right? And so our Hennick Institute has got a good program to allow faculty to do that. And she said, in fact, I actually happen to have a group of social workers from an Australian university who are doing a trip in February, and this was maybe in October or November. She says, why don't you join them? You know, this isn't the kind of trip maybe that you're going to want, but it will show you what we can do. And we had a great time. There was so much in common between me and the social worker. We started talking about corporate social responsibility and how they study it from a social worker lens. And I said, oh, well, we talk about it in this context. And so just riding in the back of the bus, you know, we said, why don't we think about a combined study abroad where we bring our Australian students, the social workers, and you bring your business students? I'm like, okay. And that was our very first trip in 2014. And it was an incredible experience. Unfortunately, our academic calendars aren't really well aligned. And
Right.
so it became problematic for them to continue that. And so I think the associate deans of College of Health and Human Services and the business schools said,
Mm.
well, why don't we just replicate that within the university? And then I met Jennifer Harrison in social work. And so we took it from there. And so, and it's an incredible experience for students, but it wasn't planned. It wasn't like I went into it with this interdisciplinary hat saying, you know,
Right.
we need to have this kind of experience. It happened, and then the magic, you know, occurred from that. And now it's become, and now again through the College of Education and Human Development, because education is the path out of poverty, right? And we need to
Mhm.
visit schools, and so there's another reason to bring another college into this, and then to have all these different students talking to each other. Like I said,
Fantastic.
I can talk about this forever.
Yeah, no, me too. So we could get carried away.
Yeah.
So we do have a few more
Yeah.
questions. Jonah Kruger asks, what are your thoughts on the partnership between Volvo and Starbucks implementing electric vehicle chargers at Starbucks locations in the Northwest region in terms of how this will impact the future of electric vehicles?
Wow, I don't even know about that, right?
I
So
don't know about that either.
I'm going to make note of the fact that you're seeing more and more. SDG 17 is about collaboration, right? And working together with others. And it could be companies, it could be governments or whatever. Um, I think if you can find entities that are coming together to explore solutions like this, then they might start figuring out some models that work, and that other people can take that concept that might be a little expensive now and figure out how to
Mhm.
scale it into other areas through other types of partnerships. So I wish that
Mhm.
I could answer your question specifically, but I don't really know much about that. I know that it's a big issue even here on our own campus, right? That we
Sure.
have charging stations over by Miller Auditorium, but they're terribly out of date. They're not really efficient. We want to have more of them around campus, but who's going to pay for that? Like that
Right.
pricing is a big issue because it's, you know, somebody's going to have to pay for the energy, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for that? So actually, I'll thank the questioner, right, for alerting me to that partnership because I don't know about it.
Coming soon to your class,
That's
right?
exactly right.
Another case
Right.
study.
Right.
So we have a question from Sherbaz. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I'm not. The question is, I'm always confused about the size, excuse me, of a sustainable entrepreneur,
Mm,
SE, in terms of their impact. Is it really necessary for an SE to be large enough to help solve the problems like climate change of
mm.
our time, right? The problems of our time.
I think that most people in the sustainability space recognize the value of social entrepreneurs, but simultaneously identify the need for scale. Right? And so there's no denying that you could have a social entrepreneur who identifies a solution to a local problem, but much of the focus is on how do we take that idea and scale it? Because if you're talking about something as big as climate change or SDG number one about ending poverty, extreme poverty everywhere,
Mhm.
a local solution is not going to do it, you know. And so I think they're trying to think about how do you come up with models that maybe you identify the issue. And there are incubators associated, business incubators for social entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out how to do this. And a part of their training is thinking about how do we scale this, right? How do we take this to the next level? Because I mean, these issues are significant, and local solutions are good for the local community, but they're not going to really make tremendous headway, at least in terms of some of these really big problems. So scale is a really big thing, important thing for any entrepreneur. If they're
Mhm.
thinking about taking their startup business from early stage to growth mode, they're focused on scale. And the same thing is true if you're focused on social entrepreneurship, not just entrepreneurship. Scale matters. I don't mean to say size matters. I'll just say scale matters.
Scale matters,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Great. So Nate has another question.
Oh,
Do you consider all of Milton Friedman's ideas obsolete or out of date? Like, for example, his idea of the business of business is business is no longer relevant in the modern day. That being said, is there anything that he said that you consider to be an extremely important thing to this day that still holds true in the modern perception
yeah.
of business? And do you think, oh, he's not done
Oh,
yet.
come on,
And
Nate.
do you think his era of business just didn't care about sustainability, or it just wasn't a top priority?
It's probably both. It's very complicated, and that's a really great question. I think back in the 1970s, we weren't even aware of the dangers that we were. Maybe they were. Maybe I'm giving too much credit of things like DDT and Agent Orange and ozone, and so on. These are really significant issues that suddenly the public had a wake-up call. Um, and business, and I might meander here, so you might have to corral me back. It was easy for business. If the business of business is business, and the law says that you can dump that stuff into the river, well, that's what a river's for, right? Or you can emit it into the air. Well, that's what a smokestack does, and so you can do that. Um, even though it may not be the right thing to go, and I don't want to lose track of where I'm going with this. Ultimately, Nate, I mean, a business still has to be profitable. It's not a nonprofit organization, right? You need to be successful, or you're not going to be able to solve some of these big issues that might be, really of interest to the company. So, partly his issue is the business of business. It is business, right? I mean, we are not NGOs, we're not nonprofits, we're not the government, and so you have to understand. And businesses need people that have skill sets in accounting and finance and marketing and all those things. But the worldview is changing about what is the role of business in society, right? Is it simply to make a profit, right? Or is it to help solve some of these issues? And business forever has been about solving problems for people, right? Somebody's got a problem. I'll come up with a business and I'll come up with a solution, right? Well, now we have some of these issues that are critical. So I don't know. I don't mean to say that he's obsolete. I think that he was misunderstood to some extent. And unfortunately, I think that some business people took it as an opportunity to pad their own wealth, right? And to take advantage of the business of business is business because it made them wealthy. But I don't know that he ever intended that. I mean, I don't want to put those words in his mouth. But I don't think there's anything turning this movement around. I think that companies, and again, we talk about it in our class. Our students don't want to work for companies that are so focused on, the quarterly, performance report. They want to work for a company with values. And will that change? Maybe. I don't know. I don't see it, but
Yeah, I've actually been impressed with how businesses have sometimes stepped in when government cannot or will not, uh, right, do things regarding climate change or so forth. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm with you. It seems like there's no turning back. We have another question from Jordan Johnson. What are some lessons that American businesses could learn from other foreign companies when it comes to tackling climate change?
Well, it's not just what American companies can learn. I think it's what Americans can learn from other cultures. Because I think our culture has been one of, again, you think about the identity of the country. We had this vast continent that was ours to take. And Europe is very different, and South America might be very different. And so there's very different cultures in other parts of the world, where our identity is a very me, individualistic orientation. So I think a company would represent that, would reflect that. Other cultures are very communal, right? And so it's really about how do we use all of the engines of society, business included, to help solve community problems, right? And where are we right now? And we're really nationalistic, and in some cases, doubling down on that. It's kind of flies in the face of that perspective. But I like that model. I don't want to be hesitant to say I like that model, because these problems require change, across sectors, government, nonprofit, business, working together, and it has to all happen together. So I hope I answered that question, that business can learn, but I think Americans can learn. And that's one of the things, come back to my study abroad. I love talking about
That's
that.
right.
Is, our Indians are so incredibly gracious and helpful and wanting to be kind of assist us in doing everything that we're doing. And we're not always that way, here. And so when my students go, they're kind of shocked that they get all these other students who are just volunteering their time because they want to be around to help this program work. And they think, wow, would I be doing this at WMU? Would I be helping this? I don't know that I would be. Maybe they would, but
Yeah.
no.
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting. The kind of the individualistic kind of orientation, I think, of American culture and just, this kind of emphasis, I think, too, on autonomy or freedom, right? Like we're hesitant to do anything at all unless you can prove right beyond a shadow of a doubt that there has been harm. I'm thinking about in the regulatory arena, for
yeah.
example, where in Europe, right, they take a more preventive approach. Like if there's some evidence that maybe something could be harmful, they're like, whoa, 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 let's slow down.
Yeah.
Let's not
Yeah.
implement this yet
Yeah.
because this could
Yeah.
harm people, right? It's
Yeah.
a very different orientation to risk
Mm.
and to the kinds of permissible harms,
Mhm.
right, that we're going to allow as a society. So I think these cultural differences run deep and have some serious implications for the kind of work that
Yeah,
you're
they,
interested
they
in.
they do. And one of the nice things about it, kind of back to climate change, and if you're talking about things like, regulating greenhouse gas emissions or a carbon tax, one of the beauties of a global economy, when you have a multinational company that's doing business in Europe, they already need to account for their carbon, and so they
Mhm.
know this day is coming. And so because they're doing business globally, they're getting exposure to those expectations, and they're saying, it's time to get ourselves prepared here. Right? And so they'll institute internal carbon taxes in their American operations because they know this day is coming. And so let's figure it out now when we don't have to pay this tax, or we can use it to, do some sort of sustainability project within the company. But let's do it. And we know how to do it because of our European operations.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah, so that's a nice kind of side effect, I suppose, of being a
Yeah.
multinational, that you kind of get exposed to different ways of being and thinking about things. So going back to the Milton Friedman question, so yeah, businesses have to make a profit, but I guess where I always get a little concerned is the question about how much profit, right?
Mm,
Like you didn't need this much profit or this much
mm.
profit. And sometimes, right, if you would eat up a little bit of your profit, maybe you could be a little more pro-social. So yeah, that
Yeah, yeah,
anyway,
I
there's
understand.
incentives I realize built in, right, for more, more, more,
And
right, growth. But
kind of back to how do you define success? I mean, if you're defining success in terms of quarterly profit, that's one thing. But if you're talking about my ability as a company to attract new customers into the future, right? Maybe I might be willing to sacrifice some profit today because it's going to help. And I don't mean to only couch this in terms of branding and reputation, but it might help the brand, right? Or it might make us much more attractive to those awesome business students at WMU who want to find a company that's doing these kinds of things. And they're going to be turned off by a company that's only focused on, we doubled our, whatever profit numbers over a certain period of time. And so there is something in it for them, right?
mhm.
And it might have to do with long-term success and viability. And it may not be always be consistent with short-term how much profit, right, is the right amount to make.
Right. All right. I'm going to take one last look at the chat to see if we have any more questions. While I'm doing that, if you have anything else that you want to get to that you're like, oh, I forgot to mention that,
Okay,
or
so two things, right? You never
yeah.
give a professor a stage like this. Two things. One, A, thank you to all the people that are here today. But two, to students that are here, you have no idea where your careers are headed, right? And I know there's this pressure all the time, and it might be coming from parents or spouses or whoever. What are you going to do when you graduate? I didn't find my passion until I was much older in life. I was a forester, I was a banker, and I can't imagine myself not doing the kind of work that I'm doing right now. And so you might be really interested in how do I get a job in sustainability because I love this. And there's more and more jobs that are out there all the time. Um, but I think part of the answer is there may not be that job. There are jobs, but it may not be it right now. But put yourself into a company and start identifying some mentors who are doing this kind of work within companies so you can learn and get exposed to these issues. Um, and don't be discouraged because you don't really know, kind of like how did my interdisciplinary study abroad come to be? I didn't plan it. but I was at least open to the idea once I was there, and thank goodness that I was. So some things take time to flourish, right? And give yourself the grace enough to
Here,
let that
here.
happen.
Great advice. Yeah, I didn't come around to my vocation until later either. You never know what's going to come down your way.
Yeah.
Being open is essential. So yes, I'm going to join in the clapping.
All right, thank you.
Yay. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for coming in today. I've put, again, some information in the chat. And just a reminder, this is also in the chat. The Ethics Center's next event is next week on Tuesday, April 5. We're going to be hearing about disputed memorials and the moral standards question from Dr. Ainsley Carey from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. That event starts at 6 p.m. and it's also on WebEx. I put the registration link in the chat for you. And you can always find out what the Ethics Center is up to by going to www.mish.edu/ethics. So again, thanks so much. I really enjoyed this. And thanks to all of you.
Good,
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.